Good afternoon. I and Vishal were just discussing. We've always been on healthcare conference, and we obviously can give a lot of deep insight. But this is a technology conference, and we really thought let's change the whole paradigm, because if you know, healthcare probably creates the greatest amount of data, but very little of this data actually becomes insights and is useful. So, you have this thing where you're creating the greatest amount of data. You're creating twice the amount of data which retail creates, but you're not actually utilizing that. The second component is, a lot of, when startups actually come and say, what's the model of healthcare in India? And, I've always struggled with that. Because every model of healthcare you see globally is also present in India. So, at the time of independence, what did the government do? We said, let's become like the NHS. What did they realize? With 4% people paying tax, there'll be no NHS. But we have components of the NHS. If you look at the CGHS, that's like a NHS. We have the American model in terms of insurance. We have every model which exists globally. We also have HMOs, which, so like a Kaiser Permanente, but the HMOs in India, not so well known. So I think the second component is that this multiplicity of model makes it complex. But what's the overriding model? Out of payment, out of pocket payment, because when you fall sick, outpatient doesn't get covered. Most people don't have insurance. So there are three accesses to care. There is obviously a geographical access to care. But do you know that, and the previous speaker spoke about not having doctors, but 70% of India's healthcare infrastructure is just in 20 cities. And it's not changing. In fact, the opposite is happening. It's becoming more dense. Yeah. The second, I think, is a financial access to care. You could have an Apollo or a Fortis, but if you can't afford it, so accessibility is limited by affordability. But I think when we look at, and maybe this is what I'll ask Vishal after this, is 10 years later, we probably are going to have a technological access to care. So Indian model of healthcare will be based on technology, very similar to, a UPI of healthcare. Because we are never going to have enough doctors. People can keep coming and saying, we'll have doctors, beds. We don't have that capacity. We've done a study saying that if you open 400 medical colleges today, you'll reach that ratio in 30 years. And guess what? Medical colleges are closing down. The second, healthcare is a very peculiar thing, again, it follows what's called Taylor's law. You know what Taylor's law is? It's in perpetual crisis, right? So if you pick up a newspaper 50 years ago, and you read the newspaper, it'll say, there's a crisis in healthcare. If you picked up the newspaper 2 years ago, it'll be again crisis, right? Because the COVID came in. Even today, you'll say there's a crisis. If you pick up that newspaper 50 years later, it'll be a crisis. But there's a way of looking at it. It could be a crisis, or it could be basically an opportunity. So I think the whole idea, and we wanted to discuss it, and obviously I know a lot of you are interested to become entrepreneurs. So I think the whole idea, what is going to be the model of healthcare in the next 10 years, is fundamental before we go into the wellness piece. And you can't have someone better than Vishal, because he's seen it for the last 30 years. And he's going to tell you, should you be a unicorn, or should be, which is a little mythical, or should you be a cockroach, which you can't get rid of? Vishal?
Yeah, so good to be here, Rana, and thank you, Nasscom, for this invite. It's a pleasure to be here. This is probably one of the most controversial sectors from the perspective of demand-supply gap, perpetual scarcity around infrastructure, around talent, around clinicians, demand soaring through the roof as the development index goes up. It's a no-brainer that as countries evolve and grow, healthcare and education are one of the fastest growing sectors. So the question therefore for us is that on the supply side, Indian healthcare is evolving very, very quickly, right? Which is, there is enough and more capital which is going behind the growth of the sector. Now, all these years, the capital went behind physical healthcare infrastructure. So all the healthcare delivery organizations which got funded over a period of time have now taken in more than about $7 billion of invested capital. Uh, then during the COVID frame, and obviously we have all been debating for a long period of time that digital healthcare and why is it so subdued in this country when the world had raised almost close to about $57 billion behind digital healthcare, and how come India was lagging behind. Then came COVID and the big spur on the digital healthcare side, and today Indian digital companies or digital healthcare companies have taken in close to almost about $4.5 to $5 billion. So there is a perfect storm that is actually coming here. And that perfect storm is sitting at the trifecta of physical healthcare, wanting to grow its infrastructure healthcare domains, and digital healthcare now beginning to creep in to sort of give enablement or give the what you may call the tailwind to physical healthcare. But more and more from an Indian consumer perspective, and that's the big question, that the way that the Indian consumer has pivoted to all things digital, how much more longer is it going to take for the Indian consumer to actually pivot to virtual healthcare or to healthcare which is digital, right? And I go back to the example many, many years back, before, all of us today think emails just happened out of nowhere. But there was a long period of time between the first 50, 60 users and the millions and millions of users that are there today. And it took adoption over a period of time. Now, if you go back and think about healthcare going down the same path, Rana, I think the next 10 years is going to be probably a very exciting journey for Indian healthcare. The reason being that it's not the dearth of capital, but I think there is a massive new ambition that is pushing the agenda. And that massive new ambition is coming from physical healthcare providers incorporating digital domains or digital opportunities, digital companies trying to find business models that are sustainable. So while there is a lot of flux which is going on in that space right now, but I think somewhere we will also come to a model which is sustainable, profitable, and at the same time can grow. And then there are all the other elements to it which are in the areas of diagnostics, that the e-pharmacy companies and how they have grown. You talked about HMOs. Those are the true HMOs today because they're trying to incorporate everything. So I think we are going to have these multiple verticals of healthcare delivery. Total healthcare ecosystem today is about $167 odd billion, out of which the delivery side is almost about 70 odd. And then there is 30 which is outpatient care. And then there is another more which is sitting in diagnostics and in the pharma. So I believe the disruption has to happen across the ecosystem. Now, whether it is the multi-specialty hospitals, the single specialty healthcare networks, digital healthcare enterprises, or the full stack digital play of reaching out to consumers and trying to offer everything. So there is an element over here which is going to be all, bred through innovation.
No, great. And I think, this probably is, they say this is India's decade, and I think I agree with Vishal. Within India's decade, it's probably healthcare's decade. Now, one of the things you've always wondered, you really don't have any dramatic news come from the medical field, right? So, you don't have a blockbuster. What was the blockbuster? You got ChatGPT, right? But it didn't happen in healthcare. But healthcare's got a blockbuster, and that's the anti-obesity drugs, right? Which has suddenly come in. Because I think that's a fundamental change which is happening on the wellness side. Obesity, and I was a practicing clinician. I would tell everyone this is a comorbidity. You need to look at it. If you lose weight, you don't need to do a surgery. We can all, but it's very difficult. You know why it's difficult? Because we all have what's called the caveman's phenomena, right? See, our great-great-grandfathers were cavemen, right? So they obviously only had a single meal. You went out, you got something, either you got killed or you had a good meal. It isn't like Bangalore, right? You're going through Indranagar and you're... Now what really happened is the species who could adapt to that are the species who are here. The others went extinct, right? We couldn't survive, right? So now what's happened is, the reason is that if you put on weight, as the quip goes, what are your chances of getting back to normal? So Vishal, the chances are slim, right?
Correct, correct, correct.
So, so I think that obesity problem continued, it's plagued humanity. Now with, the GLP inhibitors and, you really realize that you can bring that. And it's got major implications beyond healthcare. So you've seen the price of Coke go down, you've seen the price of Pepsi go down, you've seen the price of snacks go down, and, whether it's going to happen. Now also not having a comorbidity may lead to less interventions. So these are implications we don't know about. Of course, being a clinician, we also don't know about the side effects, right? Because one of the things it stops gastric emptying, which is the exact mechanism where you get nausea. So, but you tolerate it because you want to do things. See, if it had been a blockbuster and it just, medically, it was good enough. But you know why this is a blockbuster? It's also solved a cultural problem, right? Everybody aspires to that, everybody can't do it, right? And it's now what it's shown, it's not only about willpower, right? We used to say you have to have the willpower. So there is a solution to this. And I think this is going to be a large piece, how this component plays out in 10 years. And obviously it's going to set an ecosystem, right? You have the drug, but the drug is not, and this was one of the very unique cases, you look at, all know about randomized trials, but this was a randomized trial for the first time where a lifestyle coach was used both for the person who got the drug as well as the person who got the placebo. So even people who got a placebo actually lost 3 to 5%. So I think there are a lot of implications about how this will pan out. And I think it's as this ecosystem builds, right? It's like a finance ecosystem builds. There's a lot you can do. Vishal?
Yeah, so I think, Rana, that obviously if you go back and you now see the amount of capital that is going behind wellness, and in wellness it is going behind preventive healthcare, and along with preventive healthcare it is going in the entire so-called fitness group, right? So I think there is a massive push around personal health and personalization of health, which has also led to the pharmaceutical world giving rise to a lot of areas which for a long period of time were driven, quote unquote, through surgical interventions. So bariatric surgery was the answer to obesity. But if there are drugs now which are answer to obesity, then that means that there is a big push which is happening around gut health, which is the next big wave right now. So biomes, the entire ecosystem is now pushing for better and better quality of health by least intervention, which I think is the right thing, and particularly in a country like India, which has the highest population of diabetics in the world, which has an equal issue around lifestyle disorders, which are related to hypertension and everything else. So I think from an Indian context and also from where India sits for against the rest of the world, anything which is non-intervention in healthcare is going to be a big boon for future care. So the way that I see it, I think obesity is just one of those issues which are going to get tackled like this, but you will see this happening across the entire ecosystem of lifestyle disorders. You take a look at the next big wave. And I don't think it is just a COVID wave, but COVID was just a catalyst to the entire mental health area, right? And the world has suddenly woken up to the fact that, mental health is an area of big focus. Today, you can't talk about healthcare without actually talking about mental health and well-being. And so, again, a lot of it is preventive in nature, and a lot of it is emanating from that basic thought process around wellness. So I think the future of healthcare is suddenly going out from surgical interventions all the way to wellness and prevention, which should have been the starting point, right? But we have sort of taken the other path of going all the way to tertiary healthcare and then coming back down and saying primary healthcare matters.
No, I think we are to blame, right? We all from the hospital industry. So we waited for people to fall sick and then, make money. But I think now it's the whole circle.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, and you alluded to that, is that the whole longevity piece, just like obesity, it wasn't a disease, now it's a disease, it can be treated. Longevity is the second point which is going to come in. See, I want to live long, but I don't want to be old, right?
Correct.
I want that same functional which lifestyle I had at 35. And I think that's the second implication. And again, the next set of drugs are all looking at it. And, Arunima is smiling, but, the whole supplement piece on NMNs and all are really becoming very, very fad. How can you sort of reverse aging? Again, it's again got cultural implications, which, because, if you live to be 120, you may outlive a couple of spouses, right? It's got its own implications, your grandchildren. So we'll leave that out, right? That's not our domain. But then, I think aging, which is looked at a cost, Vishal, can we not turn it into an opportunity? Because now people are living much longer.
Yeah. No, so, and I think this again comes back to another model of healthcare, which is the out-of-hospital care. Now, for a very long period of time, and if you again take, I think our biggest problem child actually in the room is that insurance is not an enabler for future products and services. And I think that's an industry that needs a massive amount of disruption for it to grow. Indian households today, insurance coverage is about 37%. I mean, globally, world average is somewhere in the region of 65 to 70%. So we are still too underinsured a population today, and for the kind of medical issues that this population has, because we are not really a healthy race as far as Indians are concerned. So I think the big question, therefore, for us is that if we have to live longer, one, how do you live longer productively? And what are the models of care that need to happen as you age? And the out-of-hospital care ecosystem is the one that can actually aid that in terms of the aging process. Second, also to keep you productive for a much longer period of time. And I think that's the next model which has the potential to rise in scale until and unless the insurer comes in and starts funding it, and supporting it. So if you look at the US environment, some of the largest out-of-hospital healthcare companies are today most rewarded on the listing side. So there is no question in my head that that's again a big ecosystem opportunity for India.
No, exactly. And Vishal, see, insurance is a misnomer in India, right? We're covering acute episodic care.
Correct.
Till a couple of years ago, even, for a small cataract, you needed to get admitted, which is inefficient for the whole system, right? So I think the component of what really constitute insurance, and like you said, we've started the other way.
No, and I think that's really the crux of it, Rana, and I keep giving this example everywhere. So if you take a look at United Healthcare in the US, United created Optum, which has actually created the maximum number of innovative healthcare companies in the US. So Optum became that ecosystem which United Healthcare used, and United is the largest health insurance company over there, and it actually used to keep on creating new products and services. Which Indian health insurance company is even thinking like Optum today? Nobody. Exactly. Right? Out of hospital care, outpatient care, insured outpatient care is not even a continuing reality. So that's really where the intervention need to happen, and that's where the disruption will happen. Because the moment insurance becomes a big payer, I think all the issues today which the digital healthcare companies are today facing in terms of not being able to scale, it's all going to get settled.
No, exactly. So if you have a healthcare company, you have a valuation of X. If you're a technology company, you have X. But if you come together, like Vishal said, you can multiply it multifold. So I think that technology piece to enable the whole healthcare to happen, and this needs to be monitored very well. The other thing in India is the government is moving away from a provider, that is, providing care to people, to actually becoming a payer. And that's the next massive shift. And it's not been the best of providers. One of the things is when you move into the Indian middle class, you move away from government hospitals, right? Both on the healthcare and the education. But it cannot be failed to become a great payer. So I think that's the second opportunity which exists. Continuing on that longevity piece, so, all good news, obesity is gone, right? Cardiac disease is treated. So the only thing is, in a way, oncology is the new cardiology. Most Indians used to die of cardiac disease. But I think there are two components. You're going to live much longer, As you live longer, the pathophysiology will tell you your chances of cancer obviously increase. So the whole component of, and we are very ill prepared for, cancer. And, we've never looked at it. It's just been piecemeal from
Correct,
that perspective.
correct.
People will still go to a Tata Memorial for that. The second component, I think, where it connects to wellness is you can't really do anything about getting the disease. But early detection means that disease has no consequence for you. So how do you see that, Vishal?
So you're spot on, Rana. So for a very long period of time, oncology was not invested by the Indian healthcare ecosystem because the return on invested capital as far as oncology was concerned was the worst. And every large healthcare provider actually shied away from investing behind good linear accelerators for radiation oncology, good surgical suites for surgical oncology because there was just no returns on that. So for a very long period of time, as a country, we remained underinvested on the oncology front. And then everything else associated with that. The disease was not diagnosed on time and therefore not treated on time. So the reason why we also have so much issue today in terms of number of people who actually die of cancer is basically because the disease is never caught on time. So for India not to go down the path of oncology becoming the next cardiology, one has to basically start looking at oncology as, again, an area under prevention, right? So there are enough and more diagnostics that are happening today. There is now the proliferation of oncology is actually increased a lot more than what it was, basically because now it's from a funding perspective, there is enough and more capital which is going behind oncology. But more importantly, there from a technology perspective and also from the ecosystem point of view, there is a lot of change which is happening in terms of also many Indian providers now looking westwards and bringing a lot of clinical protocols from the US and particularly from the large oncology networks of the United States over here. So I think our path to oncology is basically the path again to early diagnostics, early treatment, genetics. Right? We all shun away from going for these genetic tests, but those are the ones which will truly tell us as to what is our propensity for oncology disorders.
No, exactly. And you mentioned, the whole private equity. There's no access to capital was difficult 20 years ago. You couldn't get a debt for a hospital because they said, how can you make profit? But today, I think access to capital is not. I think we seem to have run out of time, but so, the next we were planning, but maybe we'll do another session is, how Gen AI is going to impact it. Because, you have in healthcare what's called the AI fallacy, I being a clinician, I think, everything requires creativity, judgment, compassion. But, 90% of what a doctor does requires nothing. So in a way, a doctor's probably the highest paid clerical worker. But we'll keep that for next time. So I want to thank all of you. I know we've run out of time. We could take a few questions, but thanks a lot. We thank the organizers for calling us and hope to see all of you soon. Take care.